1. Military intelligence. The political balance of the great powers of Europe in 1914 constituted a delicate Newtonian system. Any weakening or strengthening on the part of one resulted in a corresponding oscillation on the part of all the others. A jolt to the arrangements had the potential for unleashing aggressions of enormous magnitude. With 3 pistol shots at Sarajevo, a match was flung into the powder keg of European politics. On August 1st, Germany declared war on Russia, and on France 2 days later, while simultaneously invading Belgium. Britain came to war against the Kaiser on the next day. During the rest of the month, President Wilson issued a series of neutrality proclamations. American intelligence activities, however, were already underway in the war zone. Quote, Colonel Richard H. Williams, a captain of coast artillery when sent abroad with a group of American military observers in the summer of 1914, was one who not only experienced some of the hazards of a spy inside the enemy's lines, being repeatedly bathed in chilling German suspicion, but who also was destined to take part in striking and important and officially authenticated Secret Service exploit of the AEF. Williams observed the war for 3 years before becoming another of its multitude of combatants. His first duty, assisting Americans stranded in Europe, took him to Belgium, and he was there when the steel-tipped tide of von Kluck's and von Bülow's armies inundated that land, after which he was sent to Constantinople aboard the USS North Carolina to serve as military attaché under Ambassador Henry Morgenthau. He was the only attaché with the Turkish forces on the Gallipoli Peninsula and the only American who saw, from the defenders' side, the desperate landings and attacks of the British and colonial troops of Sir Ian Hamilton. After the British, ably commanded by Sir Charles Monro, effected their masterly evacuation of the peninsula, Colonel Williams accompanied a Bulgarian army to the Dobruja and watched Bulgars and Germans mopping up strong contingents of Romanians and Russians. In January 1917, the War Department in Washington ordered its widely experienced attaché home. End quote. Footnote. Richard Wilmer Rowan with Robert G. Deindorfer, Secret Service, 33 Centuries of Espionage. London, William Kimber, 1969, page 569. Random observers, however, were no substitute for a continuous and mature military intelligence organization. As the war raged on in Europe, Major Van Diemen became increasingly worried over the prospect of the United States entering the hostilities with virtually no intelligence arrangements established. When, on April 6, 1917, a declaration of war against Germany was effected, Van Diemen met personally with the Chief of Staff to plead for an intelligence unit. General Scott said no. The plea was again made, but to no avail. With his third try, Van Diemen was told to cease his efforts and to not approach Secretary of War Newton D. Baker with the idea. Van Diemen circumvented this order. Shortly after his last meeting with the Chief of Staff, he found himself escorting novelist Gertrude Atherton on visits to training camps in the Washington area. Convincing her of the perilousness of the intelligence situation, he asked her to put his case before Baker. The next day, he planted the same story with the District of Columbia police chief, who was not only Van Diemen's friend, but also breakfasted regularly with the Secretary of War. Quote, the dual attack brought results. By April 30th, Baker was on the phone instructing the president of the Army War College to have Van Diemen report to him at once. After an hour's conversation, Baker told Van Diemen that within 48 hours, an order would be on its way to the president of the War College, setting up a new intelligence section. By May 3rd, Van Diemen had his intelligence bureau and complete charge of it. He also had been promoted from major to lieutenant colonel. From that time on, the military intelligence force had grown by means of commissioning civilians in the Army Reserve and by use of volunteer investigators. Van Diemen's agents were soon scattered about the country, working undercover among the IWW in the Northwest and among the enemy aliens in New York, Philadelphia, and Chicago. In July 1917, Van Diemen had started a plant protection section, which placed undercover operatives in defense plants. By August, his men were so involved in investigating and arresting civilians that Attorney General Gregory had to complain to Baker, whereupon Baker had ordered military intelligence agents report all enemy agents to the Justice Department instead of pursuing investigations and causing arrests. End quote. Ultimately, Van Diemen's ventures into civilian law enforcement would cost him his intelligence leadership. In the spring of 1918, while Congress was enacting the Sedition Act, Van Diemen continued to build his network of secret agents, spies, and volunteer operatives. From the beginning of America's entry into the war, Van Diemen had utilized the services of volunteer patriots eager to report on their neighbors. Some of this information might have been reliable. Most of it was gossip, and some amounted to lies and slurs. While the American Protective League, an organization of voluntary sleuths, had been established with the encouragement of the Justice Department as an auxiliary and former enforcement body, Van Diemen had eagerly utilized its services and nourished its development. Now he cultivated a very select cadre of secret agents in the Midwest. Quote, he was inclined to avoid going to the state councils of defense, sub-national affiliates of the Federal Council of National Defense, which functioned as an administrative coordinating body during the World War. Too likely to have been involved in politics, he thought. He had different men in mind: a retired brigadier general in Minnesota, a retired Army officer in Nashville, Tennessee, members of the Volunteer Medical Service Corps, American Federation of Labor informants, groups of private detectives from mining and industry. An agent of the Norfolk and Western Railway Company volunteered to supply operatives. A Denver man promised to obtain the services of detectives hired by mining and industrial companies in Colorado. An agent for a railway in Virginia promised to do the same. A lawyer from Kansas City was to organize Missouri. Another from Indianapolis was to organize Indiana. 3 attorneys from Kansas City, Kansas, were to form the nucleus of a group for their state. And all of these would be working entirely for the military. End quote. When Secretary of War Baker returned to Washington from a tour in Europe, he learned of Van Diemen's recruitment efforts and promptly attempted to restrain the military sleuths. Van Diemen was ordered to overseas duty, and Lieutenant Colonel Marlborough Churchill was detailed to head the Military Intelligence Division. The immediate spy network Van Diemen was attempting to establish was abandoned, but other operating secret agent arrangements appear to have remained in place. Footnote: Van Diemen's interest in intelligence and concern for internal security remained strong after he departed MID. He seemingly retained his ties to old volunteer intelligence operatives, and when he retired from the Army in 1929, he was given 2 civilian employees, filing cabinets, and working materials by the military to start a private intelligence organization. He apparently built a huge store of files on American left-wing political activists, ranging from responsible liberals to avowed communists. These files were divided, the major portion being taken over by 6th Army Headquarters, which maintained them until 1968, when they were sent to Fort Holabird in Maryland. In 1970, when the Army was under congressional investigation for its political surveillance practices, the decision was made to give up custody of the papers, to not subject them to the scrutiny of Army historians, as they were too politically sensitive materials, and to donate them, instead, to the Senate Internal Security Subcommittee, which had, by prearrangement, officially requested them. These papers are apparently still within the subcommittee's control. The portion of Van Diemen's files not taken over by the Army remained in California at the San Diego Research Library, a private institution created in 1952 by 3 of Van Diemen's closest associates, Major General George W. Fisher of the California National Guard, Colonel Frank C. Forward, Commander of Intelligence Operations of the California Guard, and Alfred Loveland, a San Diego businessman. The files were maintained and built upon until 1962. During this time, 3 California governors utilized the files to check on the backgrounds of prospective state appointees. In 1962, California Attorney General Stanley Mosk seized the files on the grounds that they had been used, quote, by unauthorized persons for political purposes, end quote. After a threatened court suit by the San Diego Research Library, the files were returned and were placed in a vault in the San Diego Trust and Insurance Company, of which Colonel Forward was an officer. When asked in 1971 if the files were still in San Diego, Colonel Forward said yes, but, quote, I can't tell you where, end quote. When asked who was in charge of them, he responded, I'm not at liberty to talk about that. See New York Times, July 9, 1971. Also, Ibid, September 7, 1971.
The son of a professor of sacred rhetoric at the Andover Theological Seminary, Marlborough Churchill was born in 1878 at Andover, prepared for college at Phillips Academy there, and was subsequently graduated from Harvard in 1900. After teaching English at his alma mater for 1 year, he obtained a commission as a second lieutenant of artillery and launched on a military career. Having served in various artillery commands, Churchill became editor of the Field Artillery Journal, 1914 to 1916, while also performing duties as instructor of the National Guard Field Artillery of Virginia, Pennsylvania, and the District of Columbia. From January 1916 to June 1917, he served as a military observer with the French Army in the field. Next was detailed to General Pershing's staff until February 1918, when he became acting Chief of Staff of the Army Artillery, 1st Army Division. In May 1918, he returned to the United States and became Assistant Chief of Staff and Director of the Military Intelligence Division, holding that position until 1922. He retired from active duty in 1930 and died in 1947. He appears to have had no intelligence experience before assuming command of MID and to have had no association with intelligence operations after leaving the division. While Churchill inherited and retained Van Diemen's private spy network and an official structure of regional domestic personnel, defense plant operatives, overseas attachés and observers, the AEF intelligence structure, and a variety of special agents, his tenure of office at MID did have its own unique aspects. Footnote. One of these special agents was Mrs. Arthur M. Blake, a newspaper correspondent accredited to the New York Evening Post and the Baltimore Sun, who was in the employ of Churchill, sending messages and observations out of Moscow during the war with Jewish refugees fleeing across the border into Finland. She later provided similar services while stationed in Japan, Sakhalin, and Manchuria. End footnote. General Peyton C. March was brought back from France to become Chief of Staff in March 1918, and he effected certain changes in Army structure. Under General Order No. 80 of August 26, 1918, a variety of organizational refinements were made within the Army and certain units of the War Department. One of these was the upgrading of the Military Intelligence Division, quote, which had previously been a branch first of the War Plans Division and later of the Executive Division, as a separate and coordinate division of the General Staff. End quote. Footnote. Otto L. Nelson, National Security and the General Staff, Washington, Infantry Journal Press, 1946, page 232. End footnote. Also, because the Wilson administration was unwilling to impose wartime price controls and organized labor retaliated with a series of crippling strikes, federal troops were pressed into duty to man facilities or maintain peace where labor unrest prevailed. When the Army became interested in labor disturbances, military intelligence took to the field. A vast counter-espionage network resulted, and unions became suspicious of Churchill's intentions. Writing in the Journal of the United States Artillery for April 1920, Churchill outlined functions which MID had performed during the war and armistice. Footnote. See Marlborough Churchill, the Military Intelligence Division General, Journal of the United States Artillery, v. 52, April 1920, 293 through 316. End footnote. Formerly, General Orders 80 of August 26, 1918, had said that the Military Intelligence Division, quote, shall have cognizance and control of military intelligence, both positive and negative, and shall be in charge of an officer designated as the Director of Military Intelligence, who will be an assistant to the Chief of Staff. He is also the Chief Military Censor. The duties of this division are to maintain estimates revised daily of the military situation, the economic situation, and of such other matters as the Chief of Staff may direct, and to collect, collate, and disseminate military intelligence. It will cooperate with the intelligence section of the general staffs of allied countries in connection with military intelligence, prepare instructions in military intelligence work for the use of our forces, supervise the training of personnel for intelligence work, organize, direct, and coordinate the intelligence service, supervise the duties of military attachés, communicate direct with department intelligence officers and intelligence officers at posts, camps, and stations, and with commands in the field in matters relating to military intelligence. Obtain, reproduce, and issue maps, translate foreign documents, disperse and account for intelligence funds, cooperate with the censorship board and with intelligence agencies of other departments of the government. End quote. By Churchill's own account, MID had responsibility for 1. Retention of combat intelligence experience information, 2. Application of combat intelligence historical information to training programs, 3. Awareness of combat intelligence developments in other armies, 4. Conducting internal service loyalty investigations, quote, if a state of war makes such investigation necessary, we want it done by agencies under our own control and not be unsympathetic civilian bureaus, end quote. 5. Detection of sabotage, graft, and fraud within the Army. 6. Foreign map collection. 7. Preparation of terrain handbooks. 8. Supervision of information collection by military attachés. Footnote. Quote, the information obtained by attachés is of two kinds, general and technical. The general information is subdivided into military, economic, political, and psychological information. The technical information consists of all data connected with scientific developments as they relate to the military profession. In the large capitals, officers who have specialized in aviation and ordnance are assigned as assistants in order that these matters may be handled properly. As soon as such information is received, MID at once makes a distribution which aims to place the information in the hands of the technical service or the civil official who can best evaluate it and see that it is used. End quote. Churchill, pages 301 and 302. End footnote. Preservation of the history and experiences of international duty expeditions. Footnote. Examples of such expeditions offered by the author included General Leonard Wood's administration of Cuba, the China Relief Expedition, the military government of the Philippine Islands, the Siberian Expeditionary Force, United States forces at Archangel, duty at the Paris Peace Conference, General Harry Brandholtz's mission to Hungary, and General James Harbord's mission to Turkey. End footnote. 10. Initiating and sustaining the interest and knowledge of officers in general in foreign languages, foreign countries, and in the currents of historical events which produce world situations. End quote. 11. Determining the tactical intelligence duties of the troop subsection. Footnote. According to the author, these duties included 1. Preparation of instructions for intelligence work with troops and methods to be used in intelligence instruction in the Army. liaison with WPD, War Plans Division, USMA, United States Military Academy at West Point, Air Service and Garrison Schools, and with G2 of departments and troop units. 2. Preparation of tables of organization insofar as they concern intelligence work with troops, revision of general orders, Army regulations, etc., insofar as they affect troop intelligence work. Liaison with War Plans Division. 3. Consideration of questions pertaining to troop intelligence work. A. Observation. B. Transmission of information. C. Location of our own front lines. D. Listening in both of enemy lines and of our own. E. General subject of wireless interceptions. F. General subject of trench codes. G. Information to be obtained from flash and sound ranging services, etc. Liaison with Equipment Branch, Operations Division, and Artillery and Branch Information Services. 4. Consideration of subject of tactical information to be obtained from and furnished to Artillery Information Service. Liaison with Artillery Information Service. 5. General subject of branch intelligence work. Liaison with Air Service Information Service. 6. General subject of aerial photographic interpretation. 7. Consideration of needs for special tactical manuals, handbooks, maps, etc., for use of troops or in intelligence training. Liaison with Operations and War Plans Division when necessary. 8. Consideration of the general question of the use of false information and of the methods by which it should be used. Liaison with Psychologic Section, MI2. 9. Intelligence personnel for duty with troops. Utilization of trained personnel now in the Army and in civil life. 10. The spotting of new foreign tactical methods, devices, plans, and projects. 11. The maintenance of liaison with all American GHQs that may now or hereafter be in existence. 12. Study of foreign intelligence systems. Churchill, pages 302 through 303. End footnote. 12. Forecasting international and domestic security situations in what was called a normal product. Footnote. This normal product, with the exception of map and terrain handbook information, consists of A. The current estimate of the strategic situation. B. The situation monographs. C. The weekly summary and, in emergencies, the daily summary. D. The original sources or supporting data upon which A, B, and C are based. E. The weekly survey of the United States. The current estimate of the strategic situation is arrived at by the correct use of a checklist known as the Strategic Index, which guides not only the officer who collates the information, but also the officer or agent who collects it. The Strategic Index is based upon the assumption previously stated that the situation in any given country may be divided into 4 main factors: the combat factor, the economic factor, the political factor, and the psychologic factor. Each of these factors is divided, subdivided, and redivided until every point from which constitute the supporting data upon which rest the summarized statements is assigned a number which serves not only as an identification, but also as a convenient paragraph number when observers' reports are prepared, and a page number for the situation monographs in which information is collated and which constitute the supporting data upon which rest the summarized statements of the estimate of the situation. The method thus briefly outlined constitutes what may be considered a system of philosophy applied to the gathering and presentation of information. Churchill, pages 304 and 305. End footnote. 13. Making translations. Footnote. Of the translation section, MI6, the author writes, "Theoretically, all War Department translation is centralized in this section. As a practical necessity, many of the technical bureaus during the war maintained separate translation sections. With the reduction of personnel and appropriations in other bureaus, MI6 will more and more be called upon to serve the entire Army. During the past year, this section has translated 60 technical works in 7 foreign languages. All the suspect lists furnished by the French and Italian intelligence services, 1,438 letters in 31 different languages, as well as 3,562 citations of American officers and men. In addition, 38 foreign daily papers in 10 different languages from 13 different countries are read, and the important parts extracted for the other sections of the division or for the historical branch of the War Plans Division. The personnel of this section is competent to translate 19 foreign languages, and by utilizing the services of temporary personnel, 17 additional languages can be translated. 39 government offices habitually make use of the services of this section. Churchill, page 307. End footnote. 14. Developing codes and ciphers. Footnote. The Code and Cipher Section, or MI-8, was a wartime agency which it is not practicable to continue in peace. It was secretly maintained after the war until 1929 and was to become known as the American Black Chamber and will be discussed later in this narrative. The work of this section concerned an important field of endeavor which, before the war with Germany, was almost entirely unknown to the War Department or to the government of the United States as a whole. Early in 1917, it was realized not only that secret means of communication were essential to the successful prosecution of the war, but also that in order to combat the means employed by a skillful and crafty enemy, a War Department agency was required in order to make an exhaustive study of this complicated subject and to put to practical use the results of such study. As finally developed, this section comprised 5 bureaus as follows. The Shorthand Bureau, organized in response to demands which came chiefly through cooperation with the postal censorship because of the fact that it was almost impossible for examiners to discriminate between unusual shorthand systems and cipher. This bureau was in a few months able to transcribe documents written in some 300 shorthand systems in 7 different languages. Secret Ink Bureau. By direct liaison with the French and British intelligence services, this bureau built up a useful fund of knowledge covering this hitherto little-known science, which is at once so useful and so dangerous. Over 50 important secret ink spy letters were discovered, which led to many arrests and prevented much enemy activity. Prior to the lifting of the postal censorship, an average of over 2,000 letters per week were tested for secret inks. Code Instruction Bureau. This bureau provided the necessary practical instructions in codes and ciphers given to prospective military attachés, their assistants and clerks, and to officers and clerical personnel designated for duty in similar work in the American Expeditionary Forces in France and Siberia. Code Compilation Bureau. The 1915 War Department Code soon fell into the hands of the enemy, and this bureau was required to compile Military Intelligence Code No. 5, which succeeded it, as well as 2 geographical codes specifically adapted to the sending of combat information from France. A casualty code designed to save errors and time in connection with the reporting of battle casualties was commenced in September 1918. It was not published on account of the signing of the armistice, but the work on it is complete and available for future use. Communication Bureau. This bureau was the nerve center of a vast communication system covering the habitable globe. By special wire connections and a 24-hour service maintained by skillful and devoted operators, exceptionally fast and confidential communication was established with our forces overseas and all important news centers at home and abroad. Messages from Paris were received and decoded within 20 minutes after sending, and the average time necessary to communicate with Vladivostok and Archangel was less than 24 hours. From September 1918 to May 1919, this bureau sent and received 25,000 messages containing 1,300,000 words. The only remaining agency of MI-8 is the present Telegraph or Code Room, which functions as a part of the Administrative Section, or MI-11. To a limited extent, it operates as the Communication Bureau did during the war. At this time, the American Black Chamber was operating secretly in New York City, but Churchill may not have known about its existence or activities. Churchill. pages 307 through 309. Also see Herbert O. Yardley, The American Black Chamber, London, Faber and Faber, 1931, pages 15 through 166. End footnote. And 15. Various systematic counterintelligence efforts. Footnote. The counterintelligence section, titled The Negative Branch, was formally organized by Colonel K.C. Masteller in August 1918. Reduced in size and reorganized after the war, the negative branch consisted of the following three sections by Churchill's description. The Foreign Influence section. MI4 is the parent section from which grew the negative branch. As delimited by the diversion of specialties to other sections, the duty of this section in general is the study of espionage and propaganda directed against the United States or against its allies, and also the study of the sentiments, publications, and other actions of foreign language and revolutionary groups both here and abroad, insofar as these matters have a bearing upon the military situation. Individuals are not investigated. The News section, MI10, is a combination of a radio interception section and a press summary section. In addition to the frontier stations, it maintains a transoceanic interception station in Maine, which enables the War Department to follow promptly foreign events. Under the wartime organization of MID, MI10 performed such censorship functions as were assigned to the War Department. The Fraud section, MI13, originated in the Quartermaster Corps in the spring of 1918, when, at the request of the Quartermaster General, an officer of military intelligence was detailed to organize a force to detect and prevent fraud and graft in the purchase and handling of quartermaster stores. On July 13, 1918, this force was transferred to the Military Intelligence Division, and the scope of its duties enlarged to include the detection of any case of graft or fraud in or connected with the Army. At the beginning, this group constituted a subsection of MI3, but the work developed to such an extent that on September 24, 1918, it was made a separate section. Churchill, pages 313 and 314. End footnote. To accomplish these duties, the Military Intelligence Division under Churchill, in accordance with General Orders No. 80, was organized into an administrative section and three branches, as detailed below. Military Intelligence Division Administrative Section, MI1. A. Records, Accounts, and General Section. B. Interpreters and Intelligence Police Sections. C. Publication, Daily Intelligence Summary, Weekly Summary, Activities Report. The Positive Branch. A. Information Section. MI2 prepared the strategic estimate which attempted to answer the questions, what is the situation today and what will it be tomorrow, by analyzing the situation in each country under the military, political, economic, and psychological headings. B. Collection Section. MI5 administered the military attaché system. C. Translation Section, MI6. D. Code and Cipher Section, MI8. E. Shorthand Bureau. F. Secret Ink Bureau. G. Code Instruction Bureau. H. Code Compilation Bureau. I. Communication Bureau. J. Combat Intelligence Instruction Section, MI9. The Geographic Branch, maps and military monographs of all countries. A. May Section, MI7. B. Monograph and Handbook Section, MI9. The Negative Branch collects and disseminates information upon which may be based measures of prevention against activities or influences tending to harm military efficiency by methods other than armed force. A. Military Influence Section, MI4. B. Army Section, MI3. C. News Section, MI10. D. Travel Section, MI11. E. Fraud Section, MI13. At the time of the signing of the armistice in November 1918, MID consisted of 282 officers, 29 non-commissioned officers, and 948 civilian employees. It is impossible to estimate how many thousands of volunteer and secretly recruited private agents were assisting this staff. By August 1919, MID had been reduced to 88 officers and 143 civilians. Its forces would continue to wane during the next 2 decades. Paralleling this structure of MID was the intelligence section of the General Staff of the American Expeditionary Forces under General John J. Pershing. Created by General Orders No. 8 of July 5, 1917, the General Staff was directed by General James G. Harbord, Chief of Staff, who has commented, quote, "The intelligence section dealt with a line of work in which Americans were less experienced than in any other war activity. America had never admittedly indulged in a secret service, in espionage, or in developing the various sources of information which furnish what comes under the general designation of military intelligence. The military and naval attachés serving with our legations and embassies abroad, while alert for information which might be of advantage to the United States, were without funds for procuring such matter, and were generally dependent upon military and naval publications open to anyone who cared to obtain them. Occasionally they were thrown a few crumbs in some foreign capital under the seal of confidence, and more perhaps in the hope that some third power would be embarrassed than by the thought that any real use of them would be made by the careless and sometimes amusing Americans. Certainly, censorship was an unknown activity anywhere under the American flag. Intelligence services were highly developed by our associates and by our enemies. Especially had Germany, before the World War, maintained a network that spread through many countries. Our intelligence section endeavored to embody in its organization the best that could be borrowed from French and British sources. It was responsible for information on the enemy order of battle, his war trade and economic resources, recruiting and manpower, strategical movements and plans. The examination of prisoners of war and of enemy documents, situation maps from all sources, and information of the theater of war immediately behind the enemy lines, all were intelligence. Compiling information from aerial photographs and reconnaissances, the enemy wireless and ciphers, signal communication, carrier pigeons, it disseminated information on these and kindred subjects of military interest. Counterespionage, regulation of passes for travel, the preparation of maps of all kinds, surveys, and the personnel and activity of the topographical engineers lay within its jurisdiction. Its duties with regard to censorship were very comprehensive, touching the censorship of the press, of correspondence by mail, messenger, and telegraph, as well as that of official photographs and moving pictures. The Visitors Bureau and the intelligence personnel, vehicles, and police, besides a multiplicity of detail involved in these and kindred matters, came under it." End quote. Footnote: James G. Harbord, The American Army in France, 1917 through 1919, Boston, Little Brown and Company, 1936, pages 94 through 95. The man in charge of the AEF intelligence organization was Major Dennis E. Nolan, born in 1872 at Akron, New York, of Irish immigrant parents. A West Point graduate, he served in infantry and cavalry units prior to general staff duty in 1903, seeing service in Cuba, the Philippines, and Alaska. Arriving in France in June 1917, he served as Chief of Intelligence Operations under demobilization. He was awarded the Distinguished Service Medal in 1918, quote, "for organizing and administering the AEF Intelligence Service," end quote, and also various combat decorations. After the war, Nolan saw duty at the Army War College, and with the General Staff, becoming a Deputy Chief of Staff in 1924. In 1926 and 1927, he was Chief of the Army Representation with the Preparatory Commission on Reduction and Limitation of Armaments meeting at Geneva. He completed his military career as commander of the 5th Corps Area, 1927 through 1931, and 2nd Corps Area, 1931 through 1936, retiring in 1936. Nolan apparently had autonomy of command apart from MID,
although there seems to have been close cooperation in information exchange and dissemination between the two organizations. It is very likely that Nolan and Churchill were personally acquainted, as both men joined Pershing's staff in France in June 1917. According to Harbord, the AEF Intelligence Unit was organized into 5 sections, with the following areas of supervisory responsibility specified. G2. A. Information. 1. Enemy's order of battle, enemy organization, preparation of diagrams and statements showing distribution of enemy's forces, war trade and enemy's economic resources. 2. German recruiting and classes, manpower, examination of prisoners and documents, information on German armament and equipment, translations. 3. Situation maps, except special maps made by G3, information of theater of war behind enemy's front, German lines of defense, strategical movements of enemy and plans, air reconnaissance and photographs. 4. Preparation and issue of periodical summary, information concerning railroads, bridges, canals, and rivers, road and bridge maps and area books, summary of foreign communiques and wireless press. 5. Collation of information regarding enemy's artillery, preparation of daily and weekly summaries of enemy's artillery activity, preparation of periodical diagrams showing enemy's artillery grouping. 6. Enemy's wireless and ciphers, enemy's signal communications, policy regarding preparation and issue of ciphers and trench codes, listening sets, policy as regards carrier pigeons, training of listening set of interpreters. 7. Dissemination of information, custody and issue of intelligence publications, information of theater of war, except portion immediately in rear of enemy's front, intelligence diary. B. Secret Service. 1. Secret Service and Tactical Zone and coordination with War Department and with French, English, and Belgian system. Atrocities and breaches of international law, counterespionage, direction and policy, Secret Service personnel. 2. Dissemination of information from Secret Service sources, ciphers, selection and change of, examining of enemy's ciphers, intelligence and Secret Service accounts. 3. Counterespionage, index of suspects, invisible inks and codes. Dissemination of information from English, French, and Belgian counterespionage systems. Control of civil population as affecting espionage and all correspondence with the missions on the subject. Censorship as affecting counterespionage, counterespionage personnel, regulations regarding passes in the zone of the armies. C. Topography. 1. Preparation and issue of maps and charts, all lithograph and photography in connection with map reproduction. Survey and topographical work and topographical instruction of engineer troops. Topographical organization attached from engineers. Experimental sound and flash ranging section. Liaison with engineer troops. D. Censorship. 1. Press correspondence. Press censorship. Examination of U.S., British, French, and other foreign newspapers. 2. Compilation and revision of censorship regulations. Issue of censor stamps. Postal and telegraph censorship. Breaches of postal and telegraph censorship rules. Cooperation with Allied censorships. Control of censor personnel under AC of S, G2. 3. Official photographs and moving pictures. Military attachés, press matters, visitors. E. Intelligence Corps. 1. Policy with regard to the establishment of the Intelligence Corps, records, appointments, and promotions of Intelligence Corps officers, Intelligence Police, Intelligence Corps, motor cars, administration of Intelligence Corps. Generally, the organization and structure of AEF intelligence operations may be characterized as follows. 1.
Combat intelligence forces attached to ground troop units and whose primary responsibility was to provide support to the operations of their immediate command and forward findings to AEF G2 headquarters. Footnote. Generally, on combat intelligence during World War I, see Thomas R. Goenlock with Guy Murchie, Jr., Soldiers of Darkness, New York, Doubleday, Duran and Company, 1937. Edwin E. Schwein, Combat Intelligence, Its Acquisition and Transmission, Washington, The Infantry Journal, 1936, and Shipley Thomas, S2 in Action, Harrisburg, The Military Service Publishing Company, 1940. End footnote. 2. Special support agencies, such as the Air Corps, Signal Corps, or Artillery Intelligence, which provided relevant information to field commanders and to AEF G2 headquarters, and 3. Special agencies directly subordinate to G2, such as interpreters, cryptographers, and Secret Service counterintelligence forces who supplied some relevant information to other special support agencies and to field commanders, but who also exercised some internal security and crime control powers, resulting in the collection and maintenance of derivative information which was autonomously held by intelligence headquarters. These arrangements seem to have existed until the withdrawal of troops from Europe and demobilization of the armed forces at the end of the war. Footnote. For an academic overview of military intelligence organization and operations during World War I, see Walter C. Sweeney, Military Intelligence, A New Weapon in War, New York, Frederick A. Stokes Company, 1924. During the World War, the Signal Corps continued to be a major supplier of intelligence support services, though it had little direct responsibility for intelligence operations. In April 1917, just prior to the United States declaration of war on Germany, the Signal Corps consisted of 55 officers and 1,570 enlisted men of the regular Army forces. Footnote. United States Army Signal Corps. Report of the Chief Signal Officer to the Secretary of War, 1919. Washington, U.S. Government Print Office, 1919, page 23. At the time of the armistice, the strength of the Corps had risen to 2,712 officers and 53,277 enlistees, divided between the AEF and forces in the United States. Their organization at this peak strength included 56 field signal battalions, 10 regular Army and 8 domestically stationed, 33 telegraph battalions, 5 regular Army and 7 domestically stationed, 12 depot battalions, 1 domestically stationed, 6 training battalions, all domestically stationed, and 40 service companies, 21 domestically stationed. The support provided by the Corps for intelligence operations, though not exclusively for these activities in every case, included communications facilities and services, photographic assistance and products, meteorologic information, and code compilation. These duties would remain as basic intelligence support services provided by the Signal Corps until surpassed by more specialized national security entities in the aftermath of World War II.
This is Our Hidden History